Is one you're going to notice it's not really connecting anything to anything, right? Because it's an old school bridge. It's not in use anymore. And if it was to be all the way down, our double-decker boat wouldn't even be able to go under it, because when they built it, they didn't account for how tall our boats were going to get. All right, so coming up on the left, we're going to get a better view of it in a little bit here. But just past our peach brick-colored building, you're going to notice a building with a slanted roof with triangular windows, portholes, and sails. When in 2015, that third leftmost cottage we're passing by sold for $2.25 million. So today we are paying big bucks to live on the river. We now embrace the river, right? All the buildings here in Chicago, the majority of them are embracing, facing the river. But that wasn't always the case, because we didn't always have the same relationship with the river. An example of that is this blue-green warehouse-looking building coming up on the right-hand side. This is East Bank Club. It's a high-end workout facility. Oprah Winfrey used to work out here. And it's one of the only examples of a building not embracing the river. In fact, its back is turned on it, because that's what you did in the late 1970s, right? You were treating this river like the dirty, stinky alleyway it was. However, times have changed in the late 2000s, or early 2000s. These multi-million-dollar condos went up on the left. And it no longer smells like a dirty, stinky alleyway, right? Anyone smelling chocolate? Well, you're not going crazy. There's a chocolate factory right around here, Brommer's Chocolate Factory, and that's what kind of wafts that smell. Oh, sure, I'll take a few pity claps. I see something coming on. Sure. All right, now that cow was actually exonerated from all its crimes in 1997, but I heard it took a long time for the cow to get over the guilt of the Great Chicago Fire. Now, the fire is known as the worst and the best thing to happen to Chicago. It was the worst because the first city burnt down to the ground. But what rose out of its ashes was the second city. That's the city we're in and experiencing today. That's partially where we get the nickname the Second City. If it wasn't for the Great Chicago Fire, we wouldn't be on this architectural boat tour today, right? Because architects from all over the country moved right here to this great city to rebuild it. And they did just that. And within a half a generation, they got a little bit smarter and a little bit wiser. And they started to realize, I think wood is in fact flammable. And the first 10-story steel frame skyscraper was born right here in this city. Now, we had done such a good job at rebuilding ourselves that we were able to host the World Fair of 1893, bringing us to our second story. Now, this was a huge deal for Chicago. It was our chance to put ourselves back on the map, to prove we once again were a world-class city. So we put a young architect in charge of planning the campuses for this fair. His name is Daniel Burnham. He's an important architect. We'll be learning more about him today. And he created 220 temporary buildings in the south side of the lake and Jackson Park in the classic European style, and he painted them white. It looked as if Venice, Italy was imported into Chicago and painted white. That's where we get the nickname the White City. You might have heard the book The Devil in the White City. That's what it's all referring to. Now, this campus was meant to awe and inspire with its beauty. That's because Daniel Burnham comes from an architectural philosophy known as the Beautiful City movement. Now get this, people in this philosophy, this school of thought, what they believe is that a beautiful city has the effect to inspire and dignify us, that we in fact are made better in society by the beauty that surrounds us. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I definitely believe in this philosophy when I see the beautiful city of Chicago and the warm and welcoming people that live here. Now, a few things debuted at the World Fair that you might recognize today, such as Wrigley chewing gum, cream of wheat, Cracker Jacks, PBR won a blue ribbon going from Pabst to PBR, the spray paint can, the dishwasher, the zipper, and of course, George's Ferris wheel. Now, this Ferris wheel was the first of its kind, and it was so big, it could hold 2,100 passengers. That's 36 carts, each the size of a bus, holding 60 passengers, with of course, the 61st person being a bartender. Now, 27 million people from all over the world came to this fair, and what they saw was this beautiful campus created for them. They saw the first skyscraper, they saw George's Ferris wheel, and they left impressed. They said, wow, Chicago really is a world-class city, and in fact, this fair did put us back on the map. But what it did more so is it created a hunger within the Chicago citizens, a hunger for more beauty, for more excellency. And so our city leaders, they said, hey, Daniel, you did such a good job with the World Fair. We want you to reimagine Chicago. We want you to reconceptualize it. And he did just that, bringing us to our third and final story, Daniel Burnham's plan for the city. Now, here in Chicago, we've been city planning longer than any other city in the U.S., so we're pretty good at it. Now, Daniel, he wanted Chicago to be the Paris on the prairie. Think fountains, gardens, museums, monuments. He also wanted Chicago to be a city within a garden. Now, that's very different than a garden within a city, right? Completely different priorities. He wanted every single Chicago citizen to be in walking distance from a park. Today in Chicago, we have 613 parks. That's 9% of our land. Out of the 246 neighborhoods here, the majority of them are named after the park they're next to, such as Lincoln Park. That's where I live. It also happens to be the largest park here in Chicago, 1.5 times bigger than New York City's Central Park. So that's a really big park. Now, a few other things that you might recognize from Daniel Burnham's plan include Navy Pier, Buckingham Fountain, Grant Park. He had the original concept for the Riverwalk that wasn't constructed until 100 years later, the campuses of our museums, and he extended our city grid to include 18 feet wide alleyways. Now, this might not seem very interesting or very exciting to you, but if you're living in any other major U.S. city, you're putting your trash in the front street. Here in Chicago, all our trash goes in the alleyways, keeping our city beautiful and clean. So I hope you can see how these three stories went together. We had a fire that destroys, a fair that ignites or excites, and then a plan that beautifies. Right, we're getting a good glimpse right now of some of that Chicago-style beauty. So I'm going to jump off mic, I'm going to let you enjoy some of these views here, and then we're going to continue on the tour. Now, office building. Now, how you can tell that is because the floor plates are 30% higher. Because in office buildings, you have taller ceilings, bigger windows. So that's always a fun way to take a guess. Is this going to be an office building or residential? All right, how are we doing, by the way, so far? Are we enjoying ourselves? All right, great to hear. Do you think we should keep going? What do you think? Marvelous, the Merchandise Mart. This is this rather big building up here. When it was finished construction in the 1930s, it was considered the largest building in the world. It is so big, it used to have its own zip code. This building has 25 floors, 36 elevators, 96 acres of floor space. That's the equivalent to 73 football fields and 7.5 miles of hallway. It's a huge building. It takes up 2 city blocks. Not only is it not just a ginormous building, but it's also the largest permanent art display in the world, known as Art on the Mart. Free and open to the public every single night, they project animated art onto the front face of this building at 9 and 9:30. Might be a kind of a fun thing to do tonight. I highly recommend coming back down to the river when the sun goes down and the lights and the buildings come up. It really changes your perspective on the city. It's beautiful. Coming over to the right is that $8 million projector in that glass box. So that's what they use to project that animated art. Now, the way that it's calibrated is it only reflects onto the front face of the building, not the windows. So if there's anyone working late at night, they're not going to be bothered by a bunch of flashing lights coming into their building. That's sponsored by the Art Institute here in Chicago, and it's rotating artists. Really cool, all local artists. Coming over to the right, you're going to see some people fishing, right? Now that's because they're fishing at the floating gardens or fish hotels, these nice shrubs in the water. Why they're called that is because their roots extend into the water. And the goal of this project was to repopulate the native species of fish here in the Chicago River. At the time, we only had 10 native species. Today, we have over 70 native species of fish living in the Chicago River. This idea was given to us by the nonprofit Friends of the River. The whole idea is the more life that's in the Chicago River means the better the water quality is. And we are constantly working on that river water quality. Our city leaders have the goal to be able to swim in the Chicago River by 2033. Would I swim in the Chicago River today? No, absolutely not. It's dirty, it's gross. Quite frankly, it's disgusting. Save that for our Clean Lake, Michigan water. Now that's a fun way to spend your day, and it might be one of our last few weekends you can be out on that water and take a nice dip. Coming up on the left is the Reed Murdoch Center. That's the building with the clock on top and it says Whirlpool. Now, when this building was originally constructed in 1914, it was a grocery warehouse. Now, do we all remember Daniel Burnham, right? The man with the plan? Well, in the 1930s, he wanted to extend LaSalle Street into a boulevard. However, the issue was this 1914 grocery warehouse was right in the way, and he couldn't politely ask it to move. So what he had to do, in fact, was chop off one of the bays of windows. So as we float on by this building, I want you to notice that it's in fact asymmetrical. The left-hand side has 5 bays of windows, and the right-hand side has 6 bays of windows. All right, once you finish counting that for yourself, you can come on over here to the right side with me. And we're gonna be looking at this blue reflective glass building with those sky-high patios or channels cut out into it. This building is an example of contextualism. Oh, and a wedding too, how nice. Now, those sky-high patios or channels, you can give them a little bit of woo, it's nice. The sky-high patios or channels you see reflect the canals of the Chicago River. It's also borrowing the height from our Athens Greek style temple, right? So contextualism, context-specific design for borrowing attributes from its neighboring buildings and environment. Now as we head under the bridge, we're going to stick on the right-hand side, and you're going to see a building that says number 55 on it. I like to call this building the Danny DeVito building. That's because it's short, small, squat in stature, and standing in between two supermodels. That building right there is constructed in the style of brutalism. Think institutions such as prisons, campuses, libraries. It used exposed concrete, darkened windows, and heavy materials. Right next to it is that black and gray pixelated building. That's the Leo Brunette advertisement agency. I want you to notice that two-story belt going around it. That's at the same height as number 55, giving a fist bump to the short, angry man. Making 1, 2, 3, 4, all these buildings we just passed by borrow different features from one another, making them fall under that lens of contextualism. A few fan favorites that came out of the Leo Brunette advertisement agency you might recognize today, such as Tony the Tiger, the Pillsbury Doughboy, the legendary Marble Man, all coming out of the great lines of the Leo Brunette advertisement agency. All right, we're going to look into the back of our Skyline on the right-hand side to see one of my favorite buildings. It's this green building with the gold leafing on top above Morton the Steakhouse. Everyone have a view on this building right here? Kind of looks like an old school champagne bottle, right? That's because it was created during the Prohibition in protest of the Prohibition. The Prohibition was a time in the United States where it was in fact illegal to sell and distribute alcohol. However, all good Chicagoans found their way to booze on through it. Now, how you knew you could get a drink somewhere is if the door to a building was green. That signaled it was a speakeasy. So you can imagine what was happening. And this entirely green building meant to look like a champagne bottle. A lot of drinking, right? Now that is real gold leafing on the top there. However, I highly recommend you don't climb up to get yourself a piece, as it's only as thick as a piece of saran wrap, so that's incredibly thin, incredibly intricate. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. A lot of people like to ask the question, why does the city of Chicago feel so different than cities on the East Coast? And I like to let the buildings answer this question for me. So over here to the right-hand side, I want you to notice these 4 buildings built right up next to each other. The only example of buildings that are built like this here in Chicago. They use every single inch of their floor space. You can't see the skyline through the buildings, only over them. Now I want you to think about cities on the East Coast, such as Philadelphia, Boston, New York City. They're all constructed in similar styles. Now that's because they're a little bit of older cities and have less space. As we float on by these 4 buildings on the right, I want you to think with your social scientist hats. How do these buildings make me feel? What are they telling me about society? To me, they create a sense of high-paced energy, crowds, hustle and bustle, kind of like the feeling you get on cities on the East Coast. Now let's compare it with the skyline in front of us, right? You can see the skyline through the buildings. The buildings can breathe. You can breathe. This has a psychological and a cultural effect on us, a calming effect. This is all to say that architecture matters. It informs the feeling of our city, it informs the vibe of our society, the way in which we move through life, our pace. I like to say Chicago feels like a more manageable New York City. You have everything you need in a big city like New York. However, it's a little bit of a slower energy, right? It has a Midwestern feel to it. That's why I love Chicago so much. Coming up on the left, I want you to notice just past our Wrigley Building, the building with the Gothic trimming on the top and the bottom and the flagpole sticking out on top. That's our Chicago Tribune building. It was constructed around the same time the Wrigley Building was, and the Gothic French Revivalism style. It's modeled after a cathedral in Normandy, France, and it's a landmark building. Now what that means is it's a permanent fixture in our skyline. It's not going anywhere. The only thing they can do to this building is restore it to keep it up to its original glory and beauty. So recently, the outside of this building just went through a painstaking restoration process, and currently they're renovating the inside to turn it into residence, which I think would be a pretty cool place to live, right inside the Chicago Tribune building. Definitely a little bit pricey, but I'd like to live there. Now, the actual newspaper itself no longer works out of that building. They have their own office space in the West Loop. All right, as we come under the bridge, we're going to get a nice view of our Chicago flagship Apple store. That's a building with a semi-structural glass on the left-hand side holding up that rather thin and narrow roof. That roof is in fact designed to look like a MacBook Air or an iPad. Pretty fun. All right, sticking on the left, you're going to see the building with a colorful peacock on top. That's our NBC Tower. So it was constructed in 1987. And it might look familiar to you if you're from New York City or watch 30 Rock. That's because the front face of it is mimicking New York City's 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Now that building in New York was constructed in the 1920s in the Art Deco style, giving this building the style name of Echo Deco, right? Kind of fun to say, it's copying it, Echo Deco. All right, sticking on the left, just before the University of Chicago Center, in the distance, we're gonna get a quick glimpse of the Hancock Tower. You're looking for a black trapezoid building with a crisscross exoskeleton and 2 antennas on top. Now that building right there, it's the pinnacle, it's the peak of black box modernism, the father of that genre. Chicago locals like to recommend visiting the Sears Willis Tower by day and the Hancock Tower at night for the best views of the city. They have a really nice 360-degree sky deck up there where you can get a pretty priced cocktail, but also see some fantastic views of our city, so it could be something fun to do tonight. All right, we're gonna switch gears and we're gonna be looking at some of the 2 newest residents on our river on the right-hand side, both constructed by a wonderful woman named Jeannie Gang. The first one we're gonna see is in the 2nd row, and it's that building with those white wavy panels on it, right? Now those in fact aren't panels, they're balconies, and each one of those balconies is geometrically unique. Now what that means is there's no 2 balconies are the same, and there's 3 real purposes for that. The first being it creates what looks like an optical illusion of a wave cascading down the front face of the building, giving the building its name of Aqua Towers. Now the second purpose is because each one of those balconies is geometrically unique, it cuts the wind, allowing the residents to stay out on their balcony into the colder months here in Chicago. And the third aspect is for a community aspect. Right there on the top of your balcony, you can have a conversation with your upstairs and your downstairs neighbors. So tiny people having conversations up there. That's Jeannie Gang. We're really quite proud of her here in Chicago. We're gonna see another one of her designs, and it's this rather tall, wavy looking building. I like to call this building the Dr. Seuss building, because it kind of looks like it came out of a storybook, right? Now that's the 3rd tallest building in Chicago, and it is the tallest building in the world, constructed by a female-led architectural group, Gang Studios, the head of that being Jeannie Gang. Now Jeannie Gang is a Chicago local, a Harvard graduate, and a genius. Now that's not just my opinion, she is a certified genius. In 2011, she won the MacArthur Genius Grant Award for her interdisciplinary style of architecture. She takes into effect the community, the individual, and the environment. All right, so we're gonna put on our engineering hats one last time today to understand how this building stays standing in the Windy City.